Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to this week's Monday Minute Live Chat hosted by the Canadian Leadership Congress. Today, we're addressing the question, is it time for pension funds to take a closer look at outsourcing? And here to talk about this with me, I have Alistair Almeida, Segment Lead, Asset Owners with CIBC Mellon, and Andrew Whale, Director of Funding and Risk Management with the CAAT Pension Plan. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Alistair, let me start with you. Asset owners have been turning to outsourcing in recent years. We've read a lot about it. Can you tell me why you think that is, and specifically, what are they outsourcing?
Sure. So I'll start by the drivers and why are they outsourcing. And we CIBC Mellon commissioned some research study, and we found that the top drivers for outsourcing were economies of scale, regulatory issues, and governance. And so I want to touch briefly on each one of those. I mean, economies of scale is fairly obvious. There's a lot of dry powder out there, and the ability to compete, especially as asset owners go into sophisticated asset areas such as private equity and real estate. And so the ability to compete is becoming harder. So that's sort of an obvious one, economies of scale. So the second one, regulatory issues, it's becoming more and more important as those asset owners go into sophisticated asset classes, is to make sure that the reporting is there for all of the stakeholders, including the board and the members of the plan. So I think it's very important to be able to keep up with the regulatory issues that are forcing our businesses today. And then lastly, governance. So, governance and regulatory issues sort of come hand in hand, right? And the ability to deliver accurate and timely reporting to the board and stakeholders has become very, very important. So that, I think, is the key drivers that were identified in our survey. And then lastly, data, right? Data was becoming an issue that is really becoming important for a lot of the pension plans out there, and the ability to have accurate and timely data. So I'd say those are sort of the drivers. And then the what, there's a couple of obvious, which ones are being outsourced. Asset management. So the obvious one that we look at is asset management and the need for external managers. Some of the other ones, again, is data and the ability to outsource data. And then a third one is things like pension benefit payments. So the ability to pay your members, that's another area that we're looking at as well.
Right. Now, Andrew, as an asset owner, how are you using outsourcing at CAAT?
Well, at CAAT, we're actually in a unique position. I mean, we are a plan sponsor who is using outsourcing for the benefits of our members, as we do with CIBC Mellon. But we're also an outsourcing option for our over 200 employers who trust us to provide their employees with a secure and predictable pension. So I definitely concur with many of the themes, and we hear that through our experience as well that Alistair said. But I mean, looking from both our perspectives, we see sort of three general themes for outsourcing, and governance is definitely one of them. But we're also seeing themes for reducing financial risk. And something that's really sort of emerging at a high velocity, which is workforce management and culture. And so simplifying governance of their retirement programs allows plan sponsors to focus on their core business and really give staff back their time, especially when it comes to legacy DB plans. And on the financial risk side, plan sponsors are looking to get out of the pension risk management business. And to the extent they want to, very much dictates where on the spectrum of outsourcing they lie. And just to touch on this last trend, which is emerging in the post-pandemic world of workforce management and culture, this includes attraction, retention, and financial wellness of employees, and the growing expectation that workplaces need to offer more than a paycheck. Employers need a pension plan that speaks volumes of their culture, and helping to get rid of that legacy DB plan on the side of their desk helps too. And so there's no real strict rule that dictates what us or any plan sponsor may decide to do internally or externally.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Alistair, we've talked about the different forms that outsourcing can take. But what about the how? How are they choosing to outsource, and what does that look like?
So in terms of the how, and I think you asked, and I think really around what, I think there's several things. We talked about external managers, and one of the big things around one of the reasons that a plan might you choose an external manager is really better projected returns and the ability for specialized classes as well. So that's one of the considerations there. I think when we look at consolidation and outsourcing, we think about outsourcing in a very traditional sense, but there's also outsourcing the plan's assets. So, and Andrew touched on this, and CAAT do a very good job of this, and that's really smaller plans identifying that they need to can't keep up with the regulatory issues, and they need to outsource the plan to a bigger plan and merge into a bigger plan. So I think that's something that is definitely we're seeing as a trend. When we researched the pension plans out there as part of our research, we found that the biggest current state was actually in the annuities, buying an annuity, but we also found that one of the biggest areas that pension plans were looking at was actually to consolidate into a bigger plan like CAAT.
Okay, so, are there any particular advantages or disadvantages to these approaches? Like, are there any sort of pain points or risks that you've identified in the process?
Yeah, and did you want me to take that, or shall I?
Sure, yeah, no, following
Yeah.
on you, Alistair.
Yeah, absolutely, Caroline. So I think there is, and firstly, we should say there's no one size fits all, right? So it really depends on the objective and the size of your plan. But there are a lot of benefits and disadvantages in both scenarios. For example, in the external manager category, there is a lot of pressure to reduce fees, right? So we do see that there's a requirement out there. If you have an external manager, there is pressure to ensure that the fees are in accordance with what the market is driving for. But also, Andrew touched upon this culture, right? Culture is massively important, I would say, in any activity that you choose to outsource. And that really is, am I aligned with my vendor, right? Like, do culturally they behave in the same ways as I do? And then again, driving back to sort of our data theme, technology is key. So, in our experience and talking to a lot of plans, there's a lot of legacy systems out there, and there's a lot of concern that, will I be able to have access to my data if I merge my plan into another plan? How does that work? And culturally, am I aligned, right? So I think some of those things are the key advantages and disadvantages of both approaches. I think we're going to talk a bit about how you would sort of mitigate those disadvantages and advantages a bit later, but I sort of wanted Andrew to jump in as well.
Okay, so Andrew, walk us through some of the challenges that you faced at CAAT that brought you to outsourcing.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down from our perspective to really three themes. The first is around governance. So simplifying governance, right? Making things easier as things get more complex when it comes to managing a pension plan. So whether that's regulatory, investment, administration, it allows plan sponsors to simplify things and really get back to focusing on their core business, which could be, it could be anything. You could be a pension plan like us, just looking to make life easier, but you could also be making cars or be a not-for-profit charity looking to give back to the community. So whatever it is, it allows you to get back to that, and in the end, give your staff back their time. The second theme is reducing the financial risk. Really just getting out of the pension risk management business. Getting it off the balance sheet, as well as all those other sort of governance related obligations. And then lastly, the sort of this theme that's really coming at a high velocity, increasing really quickly in this post-pandemic world, which is workforce management and culture. And so, focusing on attraction, retention, financial wellness, and how that theme is going to continue, and how you can, use outsourcing to improve that, whether that is, providing your employees with a better benefit plan, adding adding to their total package, recognizing that there's a growing expectation that we as employers need to offer a bit more than just a paycheck. And to be honest, the interesting part we've seen in our experience is how different parts of the organization may be driving at different priorities. So you might see a CFO wanting to rid themselves of pension risk management on a legacy DB plan on the balance sheet, while at the same time a CEO or a CHRO is saying their culture is demanding greater value for their employees' contributions. So we feel it's really important to bring everyone to the table to really get the most holistic solution of any outsourcing. And that employees are asking more, and that's certainly something that we at CAAT are seeing as employers join us to provide their employees with a DB pension plan.
Yeah, and I like that idea of bringing people to the table. Is that tough to do? And if so, how have you managed it?
It definitely can be tough, especially with large organizations that are multinational. In Canada, we deal with many Canadian subsidiaries of multinational companies, and so there's certain elements that if I think about CAAT as outsourced, as being the outsourcee, taking in plan liabilities, one example that we have in our merger pricing, for example, is we provide a fixed price for merging past liabilities. Something like that enables you to provide the time that's needed for organizations to bring everyone to the table. Sometimes time, and I think that can be the biggest factor here, is time constraints around decision making, especially when it comes to things like purchasing annuities, which can change day to day, week to week, really fluctuate. It's about bringing everyone to the table, having as much governance around that as you can to make sure the decision-making process is quick.
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent the pandemic has had an impact on some of these conversations and the urgency around the need to outsource in some regards. Alistair, have you been seeing this?
Yeah, absolutely. So close to half of the pension plans that we surveyed said that the pandemic was going to cause them to make, expedite their outsourcing arrangements, or certainly consider outsourcing arrangements. So without doubt, the pandemic has really, I would say, expedited, if anything, the plans' decisions to outsource. But I want to sort of bring back something that Andrew said, and it really sort of struck me, and that's bringing everybody to the table, right? So it can be an enormous task. And just to give you an example, we deal with a lot of multinational pension plans, right? So, jurisdictionally, the Netherlands is a great example. The pension plan system in the Netherlands is considered to be one of the best. And you may have a corporate in the Netherlands running a pension plan in Canada, and the rules are very different around how you fund that plan, what that plan looks like, even down to how far ahead you might be on the ESG spectrum, right? And we haven't really talked about ESG, but I don't think I've done a panel recently without touching on ESG. And that's another area that we're actually seeing, plans come to us and say, how can you help us with our ESG reporting, right? How can you do that? And that's something that comes to the fore, and you have to do that not just, interprovincially and interterritorially, but you also have to do that from a multinational perspective. And I think that's very significant and does pose a challenge. So I love that Andrew brought that up, because we certainly experienced that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Andrew?
Well, I mean, in terms of the pandemic's impact on outsourcing, I do want to bring back this theme in the post-pandemic world around workforce management, talent, recruitment, retention, financial wellness. Employees are expecting more than a paycheck, and we really think this is going to be continuing to grow as a theme. Touching on Alistair's point around culture, employers want their pension plan to speak to their culture. It's part of the total offering. And this is actually forcing a lot of plan sponsors to take a second look at what they're offering, even where they've made changes, relatively recently. 2019 feels like a long time ago for many reasons. So many are revisiting decisions made then, given how much has changed. I read an interesting article in the Globe recently around the challenges for some of Canada's large law firms, and how the pandemic's really changed the employer-employee dynamic there, resulting in increased competition from some non-traditional employers of lawyers. And we actually heard something similar. I'll give a shameless plug for CAAT's new podcast, Contributors, where we had one of our stakeholders, Dawn Marchand, who is the president of Lawyers Financial, and she represents the financial interests of lawyers in Canada, and she shared the same same sentiment, which is that people are looking for more than just a paycheck, and using outsourcing to help with your pension and other benefits that you offer your employees is going to play a big role.
Yeah.
Yeah, Caroline, I was gonna touch on that. So I host our client advisory board, and often when we talk to our clients, we often sort of poll them and say, what are the things that are keeping you up at night? What are the things you'd like to hear from us about? And there are the obvious ones that come out. Cyber risk was a big one. Data is obviously another one, but the future, what we call the future ways of work, which Andrew has sort of touched about, and our CEO often talks about the great resignation and what that's going to mean for us and returning to work and how we treat our employees. That was something that was raised in our client advisory board, right, as being something that was very important, not just to hear about what we were doing as a vendor, but to hear from their peers around what the asset owner community was doing from a future ways of work and how they treated their employees. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. So one thing about outsourcing I want to come back to, you're talking about governance, you're talking about oversight. Clearly, outsourcing doesn't imply that you don't need to worry about that stuff anymore, right? But it's not that simple. So what do you think asset owners need to keep in mind when it comes to oversight or questions about transparency, especially on the data front? Alistair, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, so you touched, the obligation and accountability is still there to your members and your board of trustees. Just because you have outsourced the function doesn't mean that you're not accountable for that function, right? So I think the way around that and the way to mitigate that is really to ensure that you're reporting to your board, your due diligence, and your service level agreements with your vendors are sort of reviewed regularly. And then, we talk about the data. I know our head of data, Darcy James Maxwell, and I think she was on this very program as well, talks about data being the lifeblood of the investment process, right? And I really think that strikes a chord, because without the data, you really can't, not just make investment decisions, you can't get the reporting that you need to do from a performance and from an analytics perspective. So I think it's key, right? Data is a key, and it takes lots of different forms of managing your data, whether that's through a sort of cloud-based service or another solution, but it is absolutely becoming key.
Yeah, did you want to comment on that, Andrew?
Yeah, in terms of oversight, when you outsource, it comes back again where the plan sponsor lies on the spectrum of outsourcing solutions and what do they want to outsource along these themes of governance, financial risk, human capital. In most cases, apart from really, merging your entire plan into another plan, the plan sponsor still remains a fiduciary and still must do best by the beneficiaries of the plan. So outsourcing to the best organization certainly crosses off many boxes for a fiduciary, but it doesn't mean giving up that oversight. And I think even I think about at CAAT, where we are the fiduciary for the members of our plan, and we still strive to ensure that we're providing value to employers and members, and we need to monitor this through surveys and stay on top of interacting with our employers through our employer services group. So we continue to monitor this. We're very proud of our strong survey results on these things. So yeah, it works both ways, but you definitely can't give up the oversight.
Yeah, Alistair, you were talking, I read a survey by your team recently. It talked about 97% of asset managers say data management infrastructure is a key focus for outsourcing. And we've talked about this a bit, but as an asset owner dealing with all kinds of data related questions and governance issues, including data security, for example, what are some of the questions you get around that, and how do you address them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So security, the cyber attack and the cyber risk is massive, and the larger financial institutions, that's part of their wheelhouse, and that they, when we look at the banks, it's very much part of their DNA in managing the risk, and they're constantly, people are constantly trying to hack the banks, right? Especially in Canada, because they see those as being the institutions that they can get the most out of, right, in Canada, and they are the dominant players and have the largest share, especially when it comes to some of the assets that we're holding. So, we point to the discipline that we have around cyber risk and some of the activity that we're doing. We talk to the spend, and again, the spend that we put into technology is massive, right, on a relative scale. When you look at our organization globally, we're sort of in the 35 trillion of assets in our global enterprise. So we absolutely have to make sure we're invested in that. And a lot of smaller plans don't have the money to invest, right? And so that's key, is having the ability to invest in the technology in order to be able to manage that data, right? So those are the questions that come up. The other questions that come up is the data can be used in a lot of different ways. It can drive your performance, it can drive your ESG reporting, and we sort of touched upon those. So clients come to us and say, we know we have to do something about data, and they're not often sure about what exactly it is that they need to do. So they sort of look to us and say, we know we have a data issue. We've got, our private assets over here, and we've got our real estate over here, and we're really struggling to create sort of a holistic view of our assets. And there are solutions in place for that, right? So those are the type of questions that we see is how do I consolidate my data? How do I exploit my data? And how do I get the most out of it, right? In an automated fashion, I would say.
Yeah, Andrew, does that, what's your reaction to that? I mean, does that mirror how you're handling some of your data requirements as your fund grows?
Yeah, I mean, data, it's interesting. I remember as a young actuarial consultant walking across the street to get valuation data on a CD-ROM and taking it back to the office. And I think there probably would have even been social insurance numbers on that data. I mean, obviously things have changed, and better data management speaks to better governance and mitigating operational risks. But I think it also speaks to how important trust and expertise are in any outsourcing, which is important for CAAT, both for outsourcing our services to CIBC Mellon and others, as well as when we take data in. And I think this is a great example of how CAAT has outsourced out to help us be better at outsourcing in whenever, as we're growing, and we bring in past service and of some of our employers. We, in many cases, that data was already being managed by an external party. And for most of the cases, we've retained that third party, or we've consolidated a number of our employers with another third party administrator to manage that past service data. And that's made the internal pension administration of CAAT service, so CAAT only pension service, much more efficient, as our systems are not bogged down with a million unnecessary data fields that are only relevant to, say, a small proportion of our members. I know that was a technical answer, but if anyone in the audience has ever worked with pension data at any point in their career, they definitely appreciate the value added from outsourcing.
Yeah, for sure. I want to touch back on some of these regulatory developments because they're quite complex. They're far-reaching, particularly when you look at the ESG landscape. What specific questions or pain points are plan sponsors coming to you for, Alistair, when it comes to addressing regulatory needs?
Yeah, so the one that is probably coming the most to us now is probably around ESG, and really it's not such an individual issue as I would say. It's more of a general issue across the board, right? And that's really the standardization of the ESG reporting. We have the ability without sounding too salesy to report on ESG within CIBC Mellon. Whether that meets every criteria across the board is, difficult to say, because I think there's really a push to standardize that regulatory reporting, and it's not there yet, right? So I'd say that's one of the ones that comes up a lot. And then just again, sort of touching on, what Andrew's pointed out, is it really comes down to partnership and this sort of whole outsourcing arrangement. And I think that's so key in the way Andrew pointed out. It's not a one-way direction, right? It's constant dialogue with your vendor and with your client around what that outsourcing looks like, and regular reviews. And CAAT's a wonderful example. The dialogue that takes place between CIBC Mellon and CAAT is frequent and often, and it is a two-way approach, and it's definitely a partnership, right? And I don't think you can underestimate the value of that dialogue.
Yeah. So I want to end again by just digging into some of the risks and how to address them going forward. Are there any specific risks with outsourcing that you hear about or that you're addressing, and how should asset owners handle them? I'll give this one to you to start us off, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly are risks. I mean, I alluded to some in my answer regarding, fiduciary duty. But I think an important exercise for any plan sponsors is to weigh those risks against the issues you're trying to solve. And so I go back to my themes around governance, financial risk, and people risk, and be honest with yourself about the risks you retain by not outsourcing. In fact, I think you need to compare the risks of outsourcing versus not outsourcing, with the latter arguably having even more risks for most plan sponsors, especially as complexity continues to increase, around investment, technology, administration, communication, governance, and you name it. And so pension plan management, it's a great example where having sufficient scale and expertise is critically important, and where outsourcing reduces our costs and risks while increasing the quality of our services. So it really is sort of a win-win in terms of the risk-reward relationship. I'll end, by saying I've sort of, if I think of my career having worked in a consulting firm that has OCIO services, I've worked in a life insurance company that sells annuities. And now here at CAAT, where we're trying to, improve retirement security for all Canadians, in the end, we all acknowledge there are risks, but it's a two-way street. And I think every single one of these, outsourcing environments that I've worked in would encourage any prospective plan sponsor to do the necessary due diligence to deem what is right for them.
Alistair, last word to you. I don't think I can add too much to what Andrew has covered there. Really I think there's a risk of not outsourcing, and I think Andrew summed it up especially well. If you want to take a look at it, it's to say, what is my risk to not outsourcing, and can I keep up with the regulatory changes? Can I keep up with the technology? And can I keep up with investment spend, right? I think those are the key things that you need to look at in a ever-changing investment environment, especially when we look to yield in more sophisticated asset classes.
That's great. Well, look, I thank you very much for your comments. It's been a terrific discussion, and I'm sure they're going to be helpful for everyone who signed in today. And that wraps this week's Monday Minute. Don't forget to send us your questions and we'll get right back to you with our speaker's response. But I'd like to end by thanking Alistair and Andrew for joining us, and say see you all next time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.